Welcome to The Community Effect, the podcast where we explore the intersection of community development, affordable housing, and the impact it has on us all. We'll uncover the blueprint for building thriving communities, one story at a time. The Community Effect, a podcast hosted by Marietta Rodriguez, President and CEO of NeighborWorks America.
Welcome to the second episode of The Community Effect. Today, we're diving into the heart of community development. I'm your host, Marietta Rodriguez. We're focusing on how the comprehensive approach that we use at NeighborWorks America supports strong, vibrant, and equitable communities. Joining me today is Elizabeth Drubak-Celaya, our Director of Community Initiatives, who has a view on many of our projects around the country. Elizabeth, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Marietta. It's great to be here.
Let's first, Elizabeth, get started by grounding everyone in our terminology. What does comprehensive community development mean at NeighborWorks?
So, comprehensive community development is really a community driven, place based, and intentional effort aimed at improving lives and strengthening communities. So, I think of CCD as really more than anything as a way of working in community. It's really about thinking broadly, beyond silos, and centering residents as the experts in their own experience and solutions to community challenges. And CCD is really grounded in place. So it recognizes the importance of where a person lives and all of the pieces of a community. And it focuses on holistic approaches to addressing community challenges.
And your shorthand version of comprehensive community development is CCD, right?
Yes, we do
All right.
call it CCD for short.
So now that we sort of understand what that means, tell me, why is it important?
Well, what we know is that communities that have a comprehensive community development approach are able to respond more nimbly and more effectively to challenges. And so when we are talking about things like natural disasters, pandemics, or community crises of any kind, having the strong partnerships, the trust with residents, and that deep commitment to place really makes a significant difference in both meeting pressing needs and moving long-term priorities forward. So a CCD approach does a couple of things. It increases the responsiveness of policy and programs to local conditions, which creates more sustainable solutions, but it's also working for the long term. And we need to break out of the cycle of isolated responses and be proactive to building up the conditions that allow for long-term growth in equity and opportunity. And CCD does that.
Now, are there guiding principles that anchor the comprehensive community development approach? And if so, share a few of those before we get into some specific examples.
Yes. So NeighborWorks is so grounded in communities, and our 45-year history of working closely with folks across the country means that we have really been able to distill some practices that are crucial to doing CCD work well. And so we call these our guiding principles. The principles of CCD are that they are grounded in place, as we said, so that's really focused on a specific geographic area. It's community driven, really centers resident voice and lifts up resident leadership, builds cross-sector partnerships to grow capacity and align resources. It layers strategies, and likewise, it layers investment to achieve those strategies. It has a guiding vision that unites people and that uses multiple forms of data, both quantitative and qualitative. And it requires a commitment to long-term work in place. And so another principle is that CCD also works best when there's a guiding organization. Sometimes we call that a backbone or a quarterback organization. And that organization is providing leadership and really being bold and setting out that vision for positive change. And NeighborWorks organizations frequently fill that role.
You mentioned earlier that we have a rich 45-year history in this work. And this is an approach that we've used throughout our history. But has this approach evolved over time? And if so, what have been some of the innovations or changes to the comprehensive community development approach that we've seen?
Yeah, well, I think we have really taken on a much stronger lens of applying equity and centering residents to the work. as well as continuing to sort of lift up the entrepreneurial solutions that we see being developed by communities and serving the unique needs of places. And so, as we've seen our communities evolve, we naturally have evolved our approaches within the comprehensive community development sector.
I hear you say how it's very place based, it's very localized. What appeals to communities about this approach? What makes them engage at a level that makes it effective?
Well, I think what we see is, and what something that we can all relate to is that people want to be heard, right? And CCD is really about hearing people. And the other thing that it does is it gives us a really important framework to approach change across difference, which is so especially important right now. So, through this idea of setting out a shared vision, unified strategy, collaborative structure, comprehensive community development really can break down barriers. It can lead to more inclusive and equitable engagement in our work. And it really allows the issues of greatest importance to residents to rise to the top.
This all sounds so positive and so exciting for a community, but what can be some challenges or obstacles that communities face when adopting this approach?
Well, I think many times people think of this approach as an either or scenario. If we're
Mm.
doing CCD, we're not going to be able to do these other things. But it's really a both and approach, right? We're talking about layering in resident engagement, layering in an inquiry around place, kind of having that um, willingness and ability to focus not only on the individual change that we're creating for individuals and households, but also on the change that we are creating in communities as a whole. Um, it does require a different way of working, right? So it's not business as usual, meaning top down, bringing in outside expertise, disrupting or erasure of existing assets. It's really a collective, intentional, resident centered approach. And that shifting in the way of working can be difficult.
What makes comprehensive community development sort of more effective than individual project based initiatives?
Yeah, well, it really takes into account the complexity of place, and we all know intuitively the impact of place. But in recent years, data has really backed that up, right? Showing how critical place is to things like health outcomes, educational outcomes, access to economic opportunity, and so much more. And so when we look at things through this lens where we're really breaking out of our silos, where we're not working in isolation, but we're really coming together around common challenges, that's what's really going to move the needle on this work.
Elizabeth, let's go into some specifics and some real world examples. Can you talk us through a community that has benefited from the comprehensive community approach?
One that comes to mind, and it's one that we recently profiled in a set of case studies on comprehensive community development that we're going to be releasing, is a small city, and it really exemplifies the NeighborWorks CCD guiding principles. So, this community has layered in a variety of strategies in a place that was facing a high number of vacant lots, poor quality housing, lack of opportunity for youth, growing homelessness, challenges that probably sound very familiar to many communities. So, this organization partnered with Habitat for Humanity to develop over 60 single family homes in a very focused area. And these are all homes that are made available to lower income first time homebuyers. So now you're layering in the opportunity not just to have access to affordable housing, but to build wealth. So, in addition, in the same neighborhood, they created a community resource hub to offer stabilizing services to the community at large. So, whether that's food, recovery support, housing referrals, and then they layered in a social enterprise business that they developed that employs youth and pays young people a living wage, high school aged youth, provides them work experience, a positive place to go, and also creates a business in their commercial district. So they brought together multiple partners to accomplish all this: government, churches, funders, and they're really seeing the results, in property values going up. all the youth employed by this business graduated high school. There's no doubt a long way to go, but this community really exemplifies that community driven, layered, holistic approach to place.
And what had to come together in that community for all of those pieces to join together?
Well, they started with creating a long term vision and a long term plan. And they identified what needed to be part of that plan, what were the resources that needed to be there, who were the partners that needed to come to the table. They built tremendous relationships with residents. And it has taken years, right? We're not talking about doing all of this in 12 to 18 months. This is, I believe it was a 10-year plan that they started working with. But it also was a really clear-eyed lens, I think, on what some of the challenges were, right? We're talking about increasing numbers of folks without housing, increasing food security, focusing on safety and crime that was occurring in this community, and bringing in the partners in the police department and criminal justice as well. So it was this really holistic approach to bringing all of that together in one place.
And it sounds like there was correct me if I'm wrong, a single organization pulling that all together, but also simultaneously building relationships with other organizations so that they all could come around the same table and share the same vision ultimately.
Yeah, that's right. We know that one organization cannot accomplish all of this. It absolutely requires partners. And so there was a driving organization, the NeighborWorks organization in this community, that was able to step up and say, we see the change that needs to happen, and we are going to bring folks together around that change. But it absolutely required bringing all of those other folks to the table and having that trust with residents so that they could be effective in the implementation of these strategies.
So, Elizabeth, where is this taking place?
This is all happening in Dover, Delaware, and Neighbor Good Partners is the NeighborWorks network organization that has been spearheading this work.
And what might be some lessons that other communities could learn from this Delaware example?
I think the thing that is most exciting about this example is the way they have layered such a variety of interventions in this community. Real estate development in the form of new housing, providing supportive services, creating business, workforce development. And I think it's that kind of approach that we really need to focus on. Oftentimes, communities or organizations may see themselves as only being good at one thing or another. And I think when we can start to open up our thinking around, hey, we're an affordable housing provider, but we can also create this small business to provide workforce development training for youth, and be able to see the connections between those things, right? Between how having opportunities for youth in the same place where you have an opportunity for home ownership, in the same place where somebody who's struggling with food insecurity can get some support and assistance, how all of those things coming together is what's really knitting together the social fabric of a community, that civic infrastructure of a place, and creating a much stronger and more resilient community over time.
I think that community infrastructure idea is so important. And I think we've known this for a long time. More recently, during the COVID-19 pandemic, I think it became glaringly obvious for people not in this business, right? One of the things that also is really apparent to me that so many communities need development support and battle some deep-seated issues related to inequity. And so, how does that play into the comprehensive community development approach?
In this work, we need the recognition and the acknowledgement of the legacy of past efforts, including both positive and negative impacts resulting from those efforts. And then we need to move forward continuously. And I think what the CCD framework brings to this is this sort of radical transparency regarding purpose and intent, early and ongoing communication with residents and stakeholders to really build and sustain those strong relationships, and that trust with community members. One of the other things that we do really well at NeighborWorks is the cultivation of local resident leaders, right? To really put residents in the driver's seat in the planning, the implementation, and the evaluation of CCD strategies. And so building that resident leadership and that community infrastructure really allows the community to have ownership over what is happening in their own neighborhoods.
Elizabeth, what you're saying is for comprehensive community development, people have to come together around a common cause and bring their individual contributions. Looking ahead into the future of comprehensive community development, what are some emerging trends or examples around the country that you can highlight for us where this is happening and change is happening?
There are so many great examples out there, Marietta. In Boston, in the Dorchester neighborhood, we have Codman Square Development Corporation. They are doing wonderful work training resident leaders in advocacy efforts, and they're actually winning policy change at the state level that is affecting housing in their community. In California, in the Mission District in San Francisco, we have the Mission Economic Development Agency, and they are actually putting residents in the driver's seat to determine how best to define, collect, and make sense of community change metrics. And remember, low-income communities and communities of color are so often studied, right, with no agency provided to residents themselves. And so this group of residents was really able to design and create their own approach to what they wanted to know about themselves. And they continue to guide that effort. In the Mississippi Delta, we have Hope Enterprises working in Jackson, Mississippi, and really throughout the Delta. And they're partnering with really isolated, small, rural communities to develop strategic plans that are setting those communities up to move forward with important infrastructure and housing priorities and access the federal funding that is available to them. So there's really incredible things happening out there that emerge when we really start thinking differently about how it is that we can and want to have impact in places.
The beauty of the examples that you provided is that they're diverse in location and in population, right? So I wonder if, as people are listening to this, they think about comprehensive community development being an urban strategy. But the beauty of what you've just shared is it's happening in Dorchester, it's happening in San Francisco, but it's also happening in rural communities. How does the comprehensive community development model flex or adapt to different needs and trends that are happening across the country? Because, no two communities are exactly the same.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the really beautiful things about this approach to the work is that it is incredibly flexible to meet the unique context of individual communities, right? Because it's all about identifying what is special about this place. What do we want this place to become? Who are the people that are in this place? What are the businesses and assets, institutions, residents who make this community what it is? And how can we use that to continue to move our place forward to become the strongest it can be? So it absolutely can be applied at any scale, really, no matter where you're working. What we ask folks to think about when they are defining their comprehensive community development outcomes is only where can you, with residents and partners, achieve change with the resources that you can make available and in a time frame that's meaningful to you.
So, Elizabeth, you mentioned earlier some case studies that you're working on. Can you tell us about those, what we can expect to see in them, and how we might learn from them?
Yeah, so what our case studies do is really give examples of the how of comprehensive community development by showcasing the stories of 10 places across the US that have used this approach to advance their work. So they ask the question, what does a focus on place look like in practice? And the places are, as you've said, big, small, urban, rural. And what we see in them is how a common set of conditions are necessary for impactful place-based work and how they show up, even when the locations of that work and the strategies employed are vastly different. So these are really great, meaningful stories of people coming together, and they cover such a wide range of strategies that I think everyone can kind of find something in and see their own community in.
I know that the case studies highlight, you've talked about Codman Square working in Dorchester. Tell us about Grow, South Dakota, because that is a more rural example. Share what we learned and what's going on there.
Yeah, so Grow has a really interesting approach to their work because, of course, their service area is statewide. So what they have done is really centered the idea of growing resident leadership in places because they cannot be everywhere at the same time. And so they will take the time to focus in on a community and really invest intensively in building resident leadership in that place. They also are leveraging our Community Leadership Institute as a way to continue to grow those teams of resident leaders who are emerging. And so they will take a team from that community to the Community Leadership Institute. They will provide the sort of wraparound supports, and they will lift up those residents to become the folks driving the work in their community, which then allows Grow South Dakota to kind of continue to spread the model and the work across the state.
They're doing some incredible work in South Dakota and other places across the country. You mentioned one of the most exciting events that is beloved by me and many others, and that is the Community Leadership Institute. We offer it once a year. For those that may not be familiar with the Community Leadership Institute, or how we fondly refer to it as the CLI, tell us what happens there. Who attends? What's the format? And why is it so unique?
So the Community Leadership Institute is all about residents, right? So we invite our NeighborWorks network organizations to build teams that consist of residents from their communities and bring those teams to a national conference where they can engage with people from all across the country. They take part in several days of learning about community engagement. They share with each other, and then they build while they're there strategies that they bring home with them to their own communities. And it's super unique in the fact that it is a conference for residents, and also in that it brings such incredible knowledge sharing and really lifts up what residents themselves are bringing to the table.
One other thing that is a real hallmark of this particular event is we ask organizations across the country to nominate a leader who is really working across sectors to create the change in their community. We name it in honor of our founder, Dorothy Mae Richardson, who created change in her Pittsburgh neighborhood more than 40 years ago. But it's the Dorothy Richardson Awards for Resident Leadership. And so I'll just give a plug to that because those awardees every year at the Community Leadership Institute are highlighted and their story is told, and they're powerful stories of community change where someone never thought they could lead change in their community, and they are. I want to just share with folks, we have a series of case studies, as we mentioned. Where can people find more about these case studies?
Well, we are going to be rolling them out over the next several weeks and months. You will be able to find them soon on our website and on our social media. So we're excited to kind of get them out to the world over the next few weeks.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us today. You've given us a dynamic view into the power of comprehensive community development. As Elizabeth showed us, community development is about more than just bricks and mortar. It's about empowering people and creating opportunities. You can find the case studies that Elizabeth mentioned on our website. They're available now at neighborworks.org. Join us next time for more stories of hope and transformation. Until then, keep believing in the power of place and the people who make it possible.
This is The Community Effect, brought to you by NeighborWorks America.